This is Between the Brackets, a Mediawiki podcast, episode 22, November 27th, 2018. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren, and my guest is Corey Floyd, who is Director of Engineering for the Core Platform team at the Wikimedia Foundation. I've already interviewed two other members of that team on this podcast, my very first interview with Cindy Chicalese and then Kunal Mehta. So if you're trying to guess who will be appearing next on this podcast, I guess it would be a reasonable guess to think that it's someone else from this group. Or maybe Corey's the last one, who can say? I wanted to talk to him now because there was just a big conference called the Wikimedia Technical Conference in Portland, and Corey, as I understand it, was one of the key participants. So I hope to ask him about that as well. So Corey, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Yaron.
Where do you live?
I'm in Philadelphia, actually.
Yeah, as I understand it, there are a few people from the Wikimedia Foundation living somewhere around you. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's actually true. So I'm personally in Old City, which is kind of like, well, the oldest part of Philadelphia, kind of where the Livery Bell is and things like that. And we have a few others, actually a couple from the iOS team lives actually not that far from me. That's Natalia Herrera, and Joe Walsh actually lives outside of town. And there's a few others around here as well.
Yeah. Do you guys ever meet, have like a Wikimedia Foundation East gathering or something?
Yeah, we try to do little working days every once in a while, like coffee shops and things like that. There's actually a new thing going around town called, I think it's called Weech Seats, which is interesting. But they rent out spaces like restaurants and things like that aren't used during the day. And they just do kind of co-working from there. So it's like kind of a nomad co-working thing. So we do that every once in a while. Oh,
I see. Okay. It's like the Uber of co-working.
Basically, yes, the Uber of co-working.
So how did you end up working at the Wikimedia Foundation?
Yeah, there's, I guess, there's like many lengths of the story.
Oh, okay.
I guess the immediate thing that happened to me was actually, I was not sure what I was doing anymore. I'd been a consultant for a while as an iOS developer. And I think I got a little bit disillusioned with working like just on a lot of V1s, like 1.0s of iPhone apps, and kind of like moving on. And it was really fun. I loved like the engineering challenge for a while and shipping a lot of apps, and it was kind of an exciting platform. But then not really being able to like maintain something, put care into it, and improve it, that got to me a little bit. And some other things too. It's like you're just working for money. So I actually wasn't really aware of the Wikimedia Foundation, honestly. I mean, obviously I'd used Wikipedia, but I didn't really know much about how it was like maintained or anything about it. And right. Really I got to like Stack Overflow, and I was just kind of looking for what I wanted to do next. I knew I wanted to do something remote, and I saw the Wikimedia Foundation pop up for an iOS engineer. So I think it was just kind of good timing that I was looking for that, and they were looking to actually beef up the team, which I think was really like one person, 1.5 at the time.
Yeah, and when was that?
So I've been here, I'll be here 4 years in January. So this is about, almost 4 years ago.
Yeah, okay. What were you doing iOS-wise at that point when you started?
For the foundation, what was I doing?
Yeah.
So, at that time, there was a big refactor, I think it was in the past year before I joined, where they went from, it was one of the old cross-platform frameworks. I can't remember the name offhand, but the app was written to work on both Android and iOS and was essentially just a web view. And they had refactored that to be a native app for both Android and iOS shortly before I'd gotten there. So it was kind of in the first iteration. And essentially, we had a web view on screen and a couple controls around it, but it was really like you were just browsing the website with a kind of like an app Chrome. And a lot of the things we were doing was figuring out, what is this app actually supposed to be? Why would someone download this app instead of use the website? Like, what kind of value can there be there for people to do that?
Right.
And so we went through the process of nativizing it and giving it kind of like an opinion of like what you do with it. So we created a lot of things like the feed, which you'll see on the iOS app, which is like, you can see the picture of the day. You can see like things that happened on this day now. You can see things around you that are going on. Like there's a lot of different things in there, like featured articles. So it's kind of almost like a feed version of main pages with a few extra things in there. So that was interesting. And we did maps was another big thing. That was one of the last things I was involved in, like as I left. But a lot of that was just a lot of refactoring, a lot of cleaning up, making it like a good UI citizen, plugging into the all the functionality of iOS. And we kind of went from, honestly, I was most the manager at this time and not actually doing the development. But by the time I left, those engineers had brought it from like an app that was just a web view up to an editor's choice app. It's like about 3 years. Yeah, so that team was like immensely proud. So it's like there's been a lot of work over there. And the same thing on the Android side too. I wasn't as involved on the Android side, but it went from just, a web view up to like a really good app like a lot of people love. So that's most of my engineering work was on that side of the house.
Yeah, okay. I have to confess I've never used either the iOS or the Android apps. I should try it out.
Ooh, I should have prepped you for that.
Oh, yeah. I already failed the first test. This is getting into the weeds a little, but now that you mentioned native versus WebView, I guess I should ask for the 5 people listening who care about these kinds of things. All of the things you listed could potentially be done via a native web app. Is that not correct?
When you say native web app, do you mean like you mean like in a web? You mean within the web browser?
Yeah. Sorry, native web app doesn't make any sense. Yeah, a web app which you could then create a little native app around it or something, if you wanted to.
Yeah, so a lot of it can be done. I think, so this is, you get back into the discussions of people, whether they want to do a website or do an app. And most organizations and companies like do all of the different platforms. And there's just advantages in doing, distributing like either an app or a website in the different places. Well, the one thing about the web is that it's like very consistent and like it's like something that anybody can use. It's open, it's easy to access. So that serves like a lot of people and like on a lot of different phones and things like that. When you get like into the native apps, you get some features that are probably a little easier to implement, and sometimes they're not even possible. Whereas on the Android platform, they're pretty permissive about what an app can do, like within the web browser. They've had service workers for a while, and you can do a lot of interesting things client-side in an Android app. iOS was a little bit more restricted, like on purpose. Apple preferred you write an app. But they just, I think, introduced service workers this year, so they can probably do some more interesting things. But I think really it's about just like preference of the users and just being available. Like sometimes, like people have the opinion of like I use apps, I don't use web, and some people have the opinion I use web and I don't use apps, and that's just a personal preference of their devices. And so I think, at least my opinion, and I think we're going more this way with the strategy, which is like knowledge equity and things like that. It's like, hey, let's just get our stuff everywhere possible. Everywhere, it doesn't really conflict with our values. And I think we've been able to do that pretty well with like Android and iOS apps.
Yeah, cool. So you were on the iOS team, and then you somehow rose up the ranks to become director of engineering for the core platform. How did that turn out? How did that happen?
So when I was working for engineering on the iOS team, I did a bit of a stint too as like the product manager before we hired like a proper one, and so kind of helped shape the direction of the iOS app a little bit. But then I kind of moved like in the tech lead, and then ended up managing both of the apps teams, and also I was managing the I was kind of like product owner, is what we would call it, for the readers infrastructure team. Which, not to get too much in the weeds, but we have services we build that are for the client specifically. And so the readers infrastructure team is actually taking a lot of the functionality of Mediawiki, the functionality of Wikipedia, and putting it in services that are easier to consume for mobile clients. And so I was one of the ones organizing kind of like making these new APIs and making it easier for the apps and the mobile web to do like things and do more interesting things.
I see. So you don't have to essentially create the same services or code or what have you for each different offering, whether that's the mobile view or the standard website or the different apps?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. What we're trying to do is that like all the clients are basically using the APIs or like in the case of the website and mobile front end, some of the internal functionality of Mediawiki like in very different ways. And so every time you say you want to introduce a new feature, you'd have to implement it differently, like
Sure.
on each of those clients. And so what we're really trying to do is take a lot of that functionality that's like in the native clients and push it up to a service, and also wrap some things that aren't even possible on the website and return them to the apps. Like a good example of that is like the on this day functionality in the apps, where we actually go through and we're using like heuristics to pull out all of the interesting dates and everything that happens within like the on this day pages within Wikipedia, and then send that as like structured JSON data to the client so they can do more interesting things, like build a timeline and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right. I guess that's part of the overall move toward more structured data. That's the Wikidata project is part of it and so forth. But I guess we'll talk about that also. But so what does your current job entail?
Yeah, so I guess like that's like the maybe the transition like into my current job is a lot of what I was doing on the other side is, although I was apps manager, I was mostly managing like the APIs for the clients. And one of the reasons I came over to the core platform team, which is it's technically a different department, not to get in the weeds, but we have an audiences department, a technology department. Audiences is mainly working on the clients and the user-facing things generally, and generally technology is working on a lot of the back-end stuff, but there's a bit of a crossover. So one of the reasons I came over is I had been working with a lot of the people like in technology, been delivering services, and one of the things we're trying to do is kind of get a strategy for how we're going to do APIs and things in the future and make it possible to like modernize a lot of our clients. So I kind of moved over that way, and that's a lot of my job, and a lot of it also is like wrapped up in the Platform Evolution program, which that also started to kick off about a year ago, where we started putting that together.
Yeah. Okay. So, core platform. What actually does that mean in that group's name?
That's actually an interesting question. And one of the things actually at the technical conference and prior to that we were actually trying to figure out whether we call it like the core platform or the platform. Everybody has like a different opinion, a different understanding of that. And that's actually, it's funny you say that when you have an organic piece of software that many people have worked on and have built many different things, it becomes very hard to define the edges of like, the software.
Right.
So the simplest thing I can say is that we are working on Mediawiki Core, right? And
Sure.
also a lot of the services that are wrapped around it that enable things for like the mobile client. So this is like mostly referred to as our REST-based infrastructure. And that has like a way for us to write REST APIs and also different types of storage for like key value type things like that. So all of that together, we're kind of calling core platform. There's probably a little more in there, a little more nuance, but that's a pretty good description.
Yeah. So it sounds, if I understand it correctly, like all those microservices and APIs and so forth that you mentioned moved from the reading group to the core platform group, and then you moved alongside them.
Well, actually, so the services themselves, the individual services, are still developed within readers, within audiences. So the REST infrastructure is kind of what they're built on. Like there's this layer that like needs to exist that can support like Node.js services or so I think there's like a Python service or two, but that's the REST base actually enables that.
Okay. How big a part of your job is just project management and managing other people?
Right now, kind of a large part of that, just because we're getting started in a lot of things. So the core platform team itself was actually two teams put together. One was like our old services team, and one was the Mediawiki platform team. and they got put together into a single team. And I guess lately it's been a lot of management and coming up and figuring out what we're going to do. We only formed on July 1st. So we've actually still figuring out a lot of things. So just figuring out how we're working together, what the important projects are. TechConf was a big part of this. We wanted to figure out a lot of the next steps that we were going to take as a team so we could actually put a plan together. And so for the rest of the year here, we're going to be figuring out the most important things to do for early next year, and also for like our annual planning, which starts in January. So we're almost back to that again.
Yeah, okay. Well, since you mentioned the conference, I think it's a good way to transition to it. So for those who don't know, the Wikimedia Foundation just had a big 4-day, 50-person conference in Portland, in Oregon, called the Wikimedia Technical Conference, and you were on the program committee for it, or head of the program committee.
I was on the program committee.
Oh, okay,
actually,
okay.
Kate Chapman was actually head of the program committee.
I see, okay. Was that the first time you've been involved in something like this?
Oh, yeah, I had no idea what I was doing. It was crazy, and luckily we had a lot of people that had gone through this before. So especially Kate was heading this up, and she works with like OSM. So she's actually done a lot of like different conferences and things here. So she was pretty crucial in getting this going.
Okay, cool. Can you explain what the conference was about?
Sure. So the conference itself was about the Platform Evolution program. So that does have a lot of backstory to it as well. I don't want to, bore you, but so the Platform Evolution program is essentially kind of working to build our infrastructure to support our strategy. So like we're talking like knowledge equity and knowledge as a service. And we know we need to make some pretty critical changes to be able to support the 2030 vision. So a lot of this is like what technical changes do we need to do? How do we enable our developers to work faster? How do we allow like client engineers to write modern front ends? How do we make our software stack maintainable? How do we actually like get features out the door? It's pretty hard when you have like a complex code base. So I think with the 15-year kind of legacy that we have, this is non-trivial stuff. So we had to put together an entire program to figure out how to do this. And I think the other thing too is that in many ways, like we've been pretty collaborative, like as a movement and organization. But also, especially if you look like at like Wikimedia, we kind of were set up in a way where we were working in a lot of silos. And we were all doing a lot of work that was important and actually like fruitful, but we were working in a lot of like separate teams rather than together on big things. So we've been able to ship a lot of small things. Like I was like talking about the iOS app, there's like node services. There's a lot of things that happened with like the Mediawiki release. There's visual editor has been like moving along, but they've all been pretty separate projects rather than say leveraging like the full engineering staff of the organization to ship something big. And so we're trying to like get like actually work on our work processes as well to be able to do things like that.
Yeah, okay. You mentioned, what was that, 2030 vision? I don't know if I've heard that phrase before. I mean, is that implying that you can really try to plan for, 12 years from now?
Yeah, that was, if you didn't know, there was a whole strategy process about like for 2030 that had been going on for, I think, roughly 2 years.
Oh, okay. Oh, it was even more ambitious. 20
years. Yeah. They had gone for 2 years.
Sorry.
Yeah. No problem.
My math is not so good. However, whatever 30 minus 16 is.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so they had been working for 2 years, like on the strategy, and they came up with just some big overarching things. And at this point, what's happening is that different chapters, organizations, we also have like strategy working groups, are working on translating like the larger like strategy into strategies for the individual organizations, and then also like for the departments themselves and what we're going to do. So a lot of the things that we're working on right now is we see. The strategy basically says knowledge equity and knowledge as a service. And so we're interpreting those things to mean like a knowledge equity. Hey, we need to be able to put like the knowledge that we have stored, we need to be able to distribute that everywhere equally, like all around the world, right? And knowledge as a service, you go back to what you were talking about earlier, we kind of interpret that, or like I interpret that as like meaning APIs. Like we got to have APIs, we got to have structured data, right? So we have to have a certain, like people can actually like query and get this information easily, no matter like where they're doing that from.
Yeah. I think this was the first ever Wikimedia Technical Conference by that name. Before this, for the last few years, there have been Wikipedia Developer Summits, which were held each January. Is this taking the place of those Developer Summits?
Yeah, they moved this. They actually moved it up. So, yeah, it used to be in January, so now it's actually earlier, if you think about it. And I say earlier. This is a weird way to think about it, but...
well, because there were two this year. There was the January one and the October one.
Exactly. And, I mean, a little administrative stuff that you don't really care about, but I was to say is like we have a fiscal year that runs like from July to July instead of going with the calendar year. And so one of the big reasons this was moved is that our annual planning starts in January, and we wanted to have a lot of technical discussion and give ourselves time to digest it before we get into annual planning. So they backed it up. They backed it up to this. So now after we came out of here, I might have mentioned this earlier, but we're going to do a lot of planning, say, for like through the end of the year to get ready for like annual planning. Like we're going to figure out what are the most important things. We're going through all the materials that came out of TechConf.
Yeah. There seems to still be a lot of experimentation as far as these events goes, with not just the name and the time of year, but also with the group size, whether it's invitation only, and if so, how attendees are selected, and then how structured it is, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, I'm speaking strictly as an outsider because I've never been invited to any of these, but it seems to me like a big part of the reason why there's so much tinkering with the structure is because you're trying to balance a bunch of competing interests. There's the needs of paid WMF developers and some Wikimedia Deutschland developers versus the needs of volunteers. There's supporting the major sites like Wikipedia and the rest versus supporting all the regular Mediawiki installations. And then there's long-term planning versus, just short-term getting things done. Does any of that sound right to you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's like a lot of things to balance like that. So I think you mentioned like some of the big ones, and yeah, I guess there's like the program committee, and then there's also like another committee that's more of like setting it up. There's some overlap. I wasn't in that one, nor actually was I in the planning for like actually like saying what the conference is going to be about and like setting it up and moving it. I kind of came in like a little later. I mean, I can say the things that I know, which is like, yeah, we definitely tinkered with it. Like we had a lot of freedom to try some different things. I think that it might be a little more ad hoc for now on, because what they're going to try and do is maybe have different subjects for each of the conferences. This one was platform evolution. This is admittedly a rather large topic, but next year might be like a much like narrower. So in the end, the format might change based on that, and also the number of people. So yeah, this year it was only 50. So I can tell you, like from my perspective, as like doing the platform evolution program and what we were doing with the conference is, I wanted to make sure that whatever we got out of the conference, like I felt like it was my responsibility to make sure none of that was wasted, and we get it actually into the program and use that information. And the main thing for us was then, how can we get like a pretty decent diversity of opinion? And I mean, people mean different diversity in very different ways. And we're trying to get people who interact with the platform from different places. And so even within the foundation, we're rather small for like a technical company or like organization. We're 300-ish people total. I forget how many engineers there are, but it's probably like about half of that. And so basically for every function that like maybe a larger technical organization would have 30 people on it, we have like 3. And so we have to go around to a lot of the teams, and it might look like it's really heavy favored for the Wikimedia Foundation, but we have people who's like, well, we need the person who really knows about databases. We really need the person that really knows about APIs. We need the piece that really knows about mobile clients. So we needed to get a good amount of people from around Wikimedia Foundation, and that also goes with Wikidata. Like all the Wikidata experts are like in WMDE, so we had to grab a few of them. But we also wanted people who were like building gadgets, right, and doing things on that side. We wanted to make sure we had extension developers. We wanted to make sure we had people like third-party developers. Because we don't know a lot of what they do. We're not great at capturing that information. So we're trying to just get like a wide array of opinions in the room. And I think maybe the last part that's not obvious is we actually had a lot of product people there and design. And the reason we had them there is because ultimately they're the ones planning a lot of the things that are released to users. And they're the ones that probably have the most connection with the end users. And we wanted to make sure that whatever we're doing with the technology follows what we actually plan to use it for. And so it was critical to get them at the beginning of the conference and have them kind of set the tone for what they were going to try and do, like over the next, say, 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. I looking through the website, I saw that the goal anyway was to have 17 of the participants be volunteers, not working for WMF or WMDE, which is, I guess, picked because it's a third of the group. It seems like an overly ambitious goal, given, as you note, all the paid WMF people that it was important to have there. I think the final number was less than 17. I'm not sure about that. Were you trying to match those goals when you were selecting participants?
Yeah, we tried. I think one of the things we had to do, and so, the selection process was a little different this year. And so we were given basically a budget, right? We have 50 people or so that we can invite. And I kind of mentioned like all the different viewpoints we wanted to get. So what we were trying to do is find people who are pretty knowledgeable in their field, and also if you could check a couple boxes, right? Like if you were like a really good extension developer, right, but you also knew a lot about core, that was really going to help, right?
Right.
If you like knew a couple of different languages, plus also you're writing gadgets, that's going to help because we can get some different like input on different language stuff. So we're trying to honestly get people who could check like multiple boxes so he could get different viewpoints. And that was really hard. We missed some people that like we really wish were there, but ultimately you got to go with what you can get. We're nonprofit, we're in a constrained budget, so we do what we can do. But I'll have to say that we actually had a pretty good like array of viewpoints on things, because a lot of the conference, what was different this year was that we were doing a lot of like workshop things. We were working on projects and kind of doing some collaboration exercises to figure out some problems together. And it really helped to have someone who could say, I do like a third party stuff, and if you do this, it's really hard for me. Or you have someone in a product be like, yeah, but we're going to try and like use data in this way in the future. And so you're solving these problems, and you have people in the room, they can say, no, that's not going to work for the database, right? That's not going to work for this, or can you do this? So it helps like kind of get some of the like sanity checks out of the way for a lot of planning when you have people in the room all talking.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned before that you thought future conferences should be more ad hoc or more informal, something like that. Is that right?
Well, I say that I say this actually not knowing anything. Excuse me.
Well, you can only express your opinion, of course.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's just my opinion. Like I'm from what I'm seeing, and like I said, we're actually haven't even had our debrief yet from the conference. We're going to do that this week for the conference committee. It's been because everybody's kind of still getting back to it, but we're going to talk about that. But I think we don't ever really want to lock anybody in on like do this exact format. You got to do this thing. We're pretty open to ideas. Like we were given a lot of liberty to run this conference differently. So I hope people do that. Like if they want to use the format we kind of did and iterate on it, that's cool. But I think you got to do what makes sense for the problems you're trying to solve, and that might be different. And I'm interested to see what people will do next year.
Yeah. Okay. No. But I mean, why do you think? Do you think it would be better to have more informal discussions that sort of spring up from what the sense of the room is and that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, we did actually do it a bit different this year. Is like we structured most of the content based off a lot of like interviews and information gathering. So yeah, maybe this is actually an interesting way to like kind of back up and talk about how the Platform Evolution program intersected with the technical conference.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So the interesting thing is that like so the Platform Evolution program was like conceived over the past year, but started in July. And but really didn't have a lot done for like the first 3 months. We're just getting the team together, starting to figure out plans. The technical conference I think was decided to be Platform Evolution like in April or something like that. So actually before the program started, the technical conference was already planned to be about the program. So we actually had to get a lot of planning done in the first 3 months of the program, which was actually a good, people call that a forcing factor or forcing function that
right.
like kind of forces you to get a bunch of work done. So what we did was actually try to figure out what the most important things were that we need to address with the platform. And everybody has a lot of opinions. And it was hard to actually get them all, like figure out like all of those things on like one piece of paper, like we have to do this, this, and this. So the best thing we could do is actually go around and do a lot of different interviews. And what we did is we tried to select what we thought were stakeholders. So very similar to like how the conference was structured. We did a lot of things before the conference where the Platform Evolution program team, which is mostly members of the core platform team, went around the different stakeholders. And so these would be people like in audiences and technology and the Wikimedia Foundation for sure. And these are people in like WMDE. And we also gathered a lot of stuff like some from third parties as well through like the Mediawiki stakeholder groups and things like that. And we made these huge sheets of basically what do we already know like that we want to do and what do we already know that's like broken or impeding us or stopping us. And so we gathered all that information together. Like I don't even know how many interviews we did, probably about close to 24. And we had just these long sheets of notes. And we were actually had to figure out a process for this. So we ended up going through all those notes as the committee team and with a few other people helping out. And we went through and pulled like all the most important things out and put them like on virtual sticky notes. We used like a tool, I think it was called Mural. And I think we had probably, if I had to guess, like 300 sticky notes on this board, and then we just clustered them, tried to deduplicate them, figure out, and kind of try to figure out like what actually is going on here. And so we did that, and we were able to distill this down to like some of like the biggest issues that we had and be a little more specific about it. And that's actually how we picked the topics for the conference. So we whittled those Post-it notes down, I think probably to about 40 different topics, and then we whittled those topics down to about I think 20 some sessions. And that was pretty tough. So this is what we did ahead of the time. And we also had, I should say too, in addition to all the stuff we did the stakeholders, we actually interviewed the participants, we gave a survey to the participants directly as they were like signing up. And so we had like that direct feedback too. And we also had one more piece of input, which was prior to Platform Evolution program starting, we had a working group called the Audiences Technology Working Group, which was in the Wikimedia Foundation. And we also worked with some people from WMDE. But we collected a lot of issues and problems like back then, too, which is kind of the genesis of the program. So we went back to all of that and grabbed all of that information out as well and pulled that in. And so we basically been collecting like a lot of data over the past year of like what like the most experienced people, the people who interact with the platform the most know, and that's kind of how we prepped everything. And what we did with all the sessions, we put key questions in all the sessions and said that, hey, for the database stuff, it's like, hey, what are the use cases for storing structured data? How many of them are there? Like it's just like laying all the things out on the table so we know what we're dealing with. Because we haven't really done that, like saying like, hey, here are the 6 things that we have to solve like storage for. That's pretty important. And so that's what a lot of the conference was.
Yeah. You gave a presentation at the beginning of the conference. I think it was called Process and Action, where you laid out what you saw as the goals and challenges involved in improving all the software. I saw the slides and the notes for that talk. I don't think there's a video of it. There's an interesting slide where you list all of what you call the frustrations around Mediawiki development. You put in around 20 of them. Some of the ones in the list are delivering a new feature is slow, getting code review is slow, hard to understand architecture, too many priorities, and unclear responsibilities. Some of these, not all of them, but some of them sound like just an issue of too few developers, which you mentioned before. Would you agree with that really that's the answer for a lot of these? Just bringing in more people?
It's some of the answer, and I think a lot of the answer too is like just, and this is like something everybody likes to say, but some process stuff I think has to happen too. It's just we used to be very small. It used to be all volunteer. And then,
right.
We had one person, Brian Vipper, and then he started, and then we slowly grew like an organization. And I think it's interesting because, a lot of organizations that run have a big technical product, a lot of times they started like as like a 5-person like team, they were funded and they created the software and everything. But the organization came into being like with the software kind of already created and growing on its own. And like a lot of the chapters started that way. And so when you do that, it's a bit different rather than like starting out with everybody kind of like owning the code or like having like responsibility for pieces of the code. We've like grown and we're just trying to get a handle on having like, what we call operational responsibility, right? Like whether we write it or not, like maintaining it and being responsible for it, like once it's out in production and like the entire world's using it. And as you grow from like a small organization to a bigger organization trying to do that, you got to change how you work, right? The way you work with 5 people is much different than the way you work with 300. And so I think, that's probably where we've struggled a little bit. And while our platform might have issues, this is one of the things where I'm kind of a big believer in Conway's Law, which I'm not sure if you've heard of, but it's essentially, like your software you build models like the communication systems and, basically how your organization is set up.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, which is really interesting because you can look at different organizations and like their software. And I think if you look at our software and you think about how our organization, our community is put together, you're like, yeah, that seems right. Like we have a sprawling organization. It's very organic. It changes. We have tons of volunteers. Like we have tons of different, teams within like, the chapters, like including like the Wikimedia Foundation, and they work together in lots of different ways. And there's lots of different connections. And if you look at our software, that's also how it is. So, there's a bit of spaghetti code in the software, and that because we have a spaghetti organization. Everybody's like talking to each other in a lot of different ways. And so, kind of answer your question, do we need more people? I mean, I think so. That's my personal opinion. But we are, as I'd say too, we're also getting more people. Like they've actually listened, and for the Platform Revolution program is being funded to like fix a lot of these things, right? And we're getting more engineers. So I think the most important thing that we can do is basically show what the issues are to leadership, and so they can show what issues are to the board so we can get funding to fix them and get more people. It's not as easy as just add 1,000 people. It's like, hey, why don't you understand what the problem is, kind of make a plan to fix it, and say I need 4 people, and then ask for 4 people with a good plan, and then you can do it. So I think it's planning plus people is what we need.
Well, what can be done other than bringing in more developers? Is there a need for more hierarchy, more structure within the organization, so everybody has a clear sense of what their tasks, their roles are?
Yeah, I think that's hard to say. Like, I do think some more structure needs to happen, but how we actually do it is like, unknown territory. Like we have a very different organization than most companies. Like we don't have a hierarchy top down like organization. We have like, a ground support, like ground up, bottom up like organization. And figuring out how to align people to do the same thing, but still also, like 1,000 flowers bloom is a challenge that not unique to us, but certainly we're at a scale that maybe most people don't have to deal with. So when we say, do we need more structure? Yeah, but I don't think it's as easy as like saying, oh, we need this like really strict hierarchy, top down, whatever. We need a way to be able to align everybody's efforts. And I think, people talk about consensus and things like this. And I think those are good ideals. I don't think we're really good at like saying, oh, that's consensus, right? Or that's enough. Like, so let's make a path. We kind of wishy-washy and go back and forth a lot. And so I think we just need to get better at saying like, yeah, we got enough buy-in on this, or we don't have enough buy-in in this, and just kind of make decisions.
Right. And I guess make it clear who is the one to determine whether there's enough buy-in.
Yeah, right. That's a clear
who has ultimate authority.
Yeah, just clear ownership, right? It's it's one of those things where and I think there's kind of a lot of pushback of like having like singular decision makers. Like having someone who makes a final call doesn't mean taking the power out of people's hands. It just means like, hey, once everybody's kind of said their piece, someone's got to move it forward, right? And that's in any case. So I think it's like balancing those two things, right? It's like a polarity, right? You got to you want to get a lot of input, but ultimately you have to make some sort of decision and move forward. And there's a balance between those things. And we'll try different tactics to see which works.
Yeah. You said before something, I'm not sure if I got it. You said there aren't that many other organizations that have this scale or these kinds of issues at this scale. Do you remember what you meant by that?
Yeah, I guess I mean when I say the scale, like we are a small organization, but we have we're dealing with a lot of different languages, and we're actually trying to listen to everybody like in those different communities in different parts of the world. We're trying to take that information in. We've got I don't even know how many chapters. Like we've got like all these different projects up, and each one of those is like an individual community, an individual group that has their own processes and communicates in their own way. And it's not so simple as like just saying, oh, we have a 3,000 person company and, this many managers and they report up and all those things. We don't have that, right? We have a bunch of like different groups like around the world that we're trying to organize. And that's kind of what I mean by scale. Small organization, but a lot of responsibility and a lot of, I guess like, most organizations might worry about their like end customers. Like if you take like a company, it's like a social media company. I think about their end customers. With us, we put a high value on like a lot of like the contributors and the communities around the world. In addition to having those like end user customers. So, like when I say end user customers, I say, hey, the people who read Wikipedia, like there's a lot of people reading, but we also have this like kind of large group of people who are like contributing and curating and maintaining it and administering and running all the events and actually doing all the community work. And that's a lot of scale for like a 300 person organization here where we're like, we're not the only people doing it, but like we maintain like the platform that supports a lot of that. So for us to go out and find all of those people and find like all the right things to do is pretty hard.
Yeah, no, sure. By that standard, it is a rather unique position you're in to have, literally millions of stakeholders, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what were some of the to-dos or action items, if you prefer, that came out of the conference, or maybe things that have been planned for a long time, but that you now consider higher priority?
So yeah, that's an interesting question because I guess there's a few things that came out of it. I should say that one of the things that we wanted to get out of it was like more of an intangible, like non-concrete thing, is that we wanted to get people of different disciplines learning how to plan together and kind of like communicate like how to ship something from end to end. Like, we've had a lot of people say like over the years, it's like, hey, people do maintain clients don't really understand the like maintenance burden they're putting on different people. People who are doing like a lot of the client work, like say they don't understand that like, hey, we're beholden to our like users and we're the ones that are like responsible for like, doing the strategy, and like we're the ones that are responsible for like actually like, hey, did we get enough people reading? Did we get enough people contributing? And so there's like this disconnect of I think some people have said like cost and benefits, like they're not really being considered at the same time. And so we're trying to get people together to like work on that. So that's kind of an intangible thing, but I think that's probably one of the most important things that came out of the conference is actually doing that. On a like more of the concrete things, we've had like several RFCs that are like being prepped coming out of this. Like, things that have been longstanding issues, like when should we build a service, right, as opposed to build something within Mediawiki itself. We haven't had like a good rubric for that, and sometimes we have a lot of contention about whether something should be a service or whether something should be included in Mediawiki. And so, yeah, we have an RFC like being put together. It's being put together like by Ian Marley on the performance team, who's like not on the core platform team, but he ran the session for that, and they got some good outcomes out of it. So they're going to do that. And so that'll go through RFC, that'll go through TechCom, and we'll see how that goes. But I think that's a pretty good example of like, it doesn't seem like that's a big deal, but when you consider that almost every time we have to build something new, we have this big, huge back and forth with things like this, right? Like, is it a service? Right. Is it in MediaWiki? So if we can just kind of like set up like a guide that just says, go through these boxes. You probably recommend being a service. Probably recommend.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's helpful, right? So we can kind of just avoid those things and move on. And that's the kind of things we want to do. So if you think about, and I know we're not going over the stuff from the presentation directly, but like, a lot of what we were trying to do is just smooth out the processes for shipping things, right? Let's make them easier, and not having like a month-long protracted discussion on Fabricator about where something should live helps. Right, that actually gets something shipped faster, and so those are some of the more like innocuous things that like we might be doing. I'd say like another like even more concrete thing would be like with extension developments. Like we know that like we got to make some changes to how extensions are implemented, or like how they're used to be able to move the architecture forward. So I think it was Timo, it was Crinkle, is putting together an RFC. Like on some of like the extension API stuff and how they're defined. So that'll be an interesting one that's coming up, and a few other things. But those are three pretty good examples, I think.
Yeah. I may have seen that there's some discussion about maybe replacing hooks in Mediawiki, in core Mediawiki, with something else or something like that.
Yeah, there's something with the hooks, and there's also too about like I think we're going to call them filter types, or I'm sorry, like extension types, like whether like it's a filter or something else, like to define like what their role is, so it makes them a little easier to configure and makes it a little more manageable.
I see. Oh, that's interesting. Speaking, I guess, of extensions, there was. I wasn't sure whether to ask about this or when, but I guess I'll just go ahead now. There was a slide in your presentation that really stuck out at me because I disagree with it. It's a slide called A Common Core, where you have a sort of Venn diagram of the different main platforms for Wikimedia development and what they have in common with each other. Did you create that image?
Yeah, it was kind of like just an experiment I was doing with like a designer trying to just make sense of the ecosystem. It's kind of like a framework for thinking about it. So it's kind of we put a bit of like thought into that. Like, what are the main things that the software does, and how are they shared depending upon like basically. I don't know if you want to call them multiple flat platforms or multiple views on the platform, but it's kind of like showing those types of relationships.
Yeah. Overall, I think it's a good idea, and a lot of it made sense. There was one part that struck me as odd, and I think it's an interesting example maybe of the gap that exists between core MediaWiki developers and the so-called enterprise MediaWiki world. So if I can just describe it, I'll have a link to it. Overall, I think it's good, but basically there are 4 circles representing, I guess, the 4 main platforms for development. And the 4 circles are MediaWiki, and then Wikipedia Plus, which includes Commons, Wiktionary, etc. Basically all the sites except for Wikidata. And then there's Wikidata, which gets a separate circle. And then there's a 4th circle for Wikibase, which is the software that powers Wikidata. Yeah.
Oh, so actually, just a correction. So, and this is what's confusing about this diagram. We use we're terrible at names. And we use them to mean lots and lots of different things. So Wikibase is both an extension and also the branding we're using for a third-party Wikibase install. So like that's actually being called almost like a product. It's called Wikibase. So if you were like an institution and wanted something like Wikidata to host your own data and model your own data, that's called Wikibase as well.
Well, yeah, sure. Well, that's the same thing. No, I mean it's the software everyone can download that same software if that's what you mean.
Oh yeah, I just mean it's separate from the extension is called Wikibase and the product is called Wikibase. Just to clarify that.
What's the difference between the extension and the product?
So the extension is just like, well, there's two extensions. I think it's like Wikibase client, which those are just like the literal pieces of code that you add to Mediawiki to make it able to model data. And then once you do that, once you add those in, you have a couple options what you can do. You can put it on the train and deploy it and do some stuff, and you can call it Wikidata, or you can package it up with a minimal set of extensions and make a distribution of it. And that distribution that third party uses is called Wikibase as well.
Okay, yeah. So you're saying Wikibase is sort of an alias, a pseudonym for Mediawiki plus Wikibase.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. It struck me as odd because obviously there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of extensions that people can download. That it struck me as odd that you singled out Wikibase specifically for a separate platform. What do you think makes that unique?
Oh yeah, that's interesting. So if that Venn diagram actually started out like as a kind of like a quadrant graph, basically, where like one axis was either using by third parties or using within like the Wikimedia infrastructure for large scale, like Wikipedia type projects. And the other axis was regular content versus data content, like data. And so if you look at it that way, it's basically what is data and what is not data, and then what is like large and for in-house Wikipedia stuff, and then what is for third parties. And so the reason those are singled out is just that's more of like a mental model how I think a lot of us like within the foundation could view or might view like what we ship. So like one thing we ship is like the Mediawiki release, right? And so that's what one of those circles says. We actually make a release for Mediawiki. We're also like making a release for Wikibase. We like make that. Those are two things that we make and we distribute. We also make the software which runs all of the Wikimedia projects, right? That's like the Wikimedia platform. And then we also make the software which runs or like make that and which makes Wikidata, right? And we build and like put that out. And so that's why there's those four things. Those are the four things like as like between WMF and the WMDE that we actually distribute.
I see. Okay. I guess I think I wasn't aware that there was actually an official Wikibase release intended for third-party use.
Yeah, if it's not quite official yet, it's being worked on. But I'd have to double check on that. I'm not like in the loop totally on all that.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking personally, I think that's a bad idea to do that because I think there are better tools for data modeling than Wikibase that exist already. Well, I guess it's part of a general gripe I have with the current promotion of Wikibase, especially by the Wikimedia Foundation, which has put out a bunch of blog posts and stuff about how great it is to use Wikibase. I think it's just going to waste a lot of people's time, but it's not. That's not really your jurisdiction. That's more of a marketing thing, I guess, / a WMDE thing.
Yeah, I mean they're figuring that out in the audience department, like WMDE. I'm not super plugged in there. I know some things, but I think one of the things they're really trying to do is we have Wikidata, which is like basically to model like the world's knowledge. And sometimes, they're looking for ways to get more information into it. And the Wikibase model is like a way to do it. Is they're really thinking about like the federation aspect of it. And like, hey, if you give something to an institution, and they start modeling data, hopefully we try. I think they want to try to do is like build a way to like, hey, once you put that data in, is there an easy way to kind of upstream that data, like into Wikidata, or maybe you just want to keep your own. In that case, I'm sure there's lots of competitive like piece of software to like structure data and not do anything with it. I think the main thing with Wikibase is like structure your data and also have an outlet to kind of share that to Wikidata. So that's kind of, I think, the thinking about it. But yeah, that's kind of the limit of my knowledge.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. It's just a pet peeve of mine. I think there are ways to share with Wikidata, even using things like Semantic Mediawiki and Cargo. Although I'm not 100% sure on that. So that's probably worth having a separate discussion with some Wikibase person at some point.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people more qualified than me to talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to ask about something else, which you may have more direct knowledge of, which is Parsoid. I know it was one of the subjects of discussion. I don't know how much. Basically, if I can summarize the history, the people who created Visual Editor starting around 2011 decided that the standard Mediawiki parser wasn't good enough. Well, first of all, they needed something that could do Wikitext to HTML and HTML to Wikitext. And second, they weren't sure that PHP would be fast enough. Anyway, so they decided to create a new parser in JavaScript, which they called Parsoid. It works great now, but the downside is that anybody who wants to run Visual Editor needs to also be running a Node.js service. And potentially, if Parsoid ends up getting used by core MediaWiki, then Node.js would become a requirement for MediaWiki in general. I guess rewriting Parsoid in PHP was something that came up. What do you think about that idea, and did the conference affect your thinking on the subject?
Yeah, so actually, it's funny you bring that up. We had a session on the parser, but it was actually a small session because during the last Dev Summit, we had actually had the bigger discussions around what we were going to do with the parser and the parser unification. And so the thing we were doing right now, and actually the parsing team's been working on, is that they're going to see prototype actually putting the parser back into PHP and seeing how it works now with PHP 7, because we're moving off of a HHVM back to PHP 7. And it was actually found in the past. I wasn't in those discussions back then. I just kind of know the history a little bit, but that. Yeah, the old versions of PHP just weren't fast enough to do the bidirectional stuff that we needed to do. And so they made the decision to do JavaScript, and that actually set up this whole kind of parallel infrastructure, which is one of the things Platform Evolution is trying to unify, just in total, or at least find a good way for them to communicate. But putting the parser in JavaScript, what we have the way we call it is a very chatty service, where even though the parser is in JavaScript, it has to talk to MediaWiki quite a bit to get its job done. Just
that's
because,
interesting.
Yeah, it's weird. It's just because of the infrastructure. Part of it is, and I think it's actually interesting they pulled it out because I think it exposed a lot of issues that we still know we have to fix. So the fact that the parser is chatty when we pulled it out means that we'll put it back in, but that's not the ultimate solution. That's a step, right? We found that listen. The parser should not be back in and out and doing all these connections all the time. So we actually do need to do a refactor of parsing in general, but the first thing we really need to do to actually move forward is get down to one parser, because fixing two parsers is pretty hard, right? That's double the work. So the first thing is getting the parser done. But we've exposed a lot of things that this is why we should refactor. This is why maybe we should iterate on how Wikitext works, right? This is all these different things. This should be an API. This should not. Anyways, parsing team, they're prototyping. The thing we did at TechConf was not actually talk about putting it back in PHP. Was actually we just actually refined the plan a little bit. Parsing has been working on the plan, so they did a bit of reporting out to say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is how it's going. And also we were double checking to make sure. Listen, if we're moving out of JavaScript, are we losing anything? Is this going to be worse for some reason than better, right? One thing we were looking at is obviously JavaScript can be ran by browsers, right? So a question is, do we ever want the parser to run on a client? Because if we do, JavaScript's a better option, right? So that's just I ultimately we decided no, we can do all the parsing on the back end. But that's a question you want to answer, and that's kind of what I was talking about. Is just getting better about those things. Is asking product, having people in the room is hey, do we need the parser in the front end so you can do, say, offline stuff, right? Because maybe if you do offline Visual Editor, maybe you need the parser. I don't know, right? So it depends how you architect it. But we ultimately decided like, no, that wouldn't be necessary for that. So we're moving forward with like, prototyping and testing and trying to get it back into PHP. And at the same time, we have a parallel thing going on, which is actually the migration to PHP 7.
Yeah. So then if Parsoid does get moved over to PHP, would that become the new Mediawiki parser?
I think that's the plan. I think as everything I've heard is that the Parsoid markup is superior than not just regular parser markup, and that is what is needed for Visual Editor. So I think that's pretty much a foregone conclusion. And I think with all these things is that we got to go one step at a time, though, right? I say foregone conclusion, but honestly, things come up in software development. So we're going to get it unified, right? We're going to get it into PHP, and we'll have the two parsers. Probably then some things will come up. How fast can we unify them? Are there things we need to bring from the PHP parser over to Parsoid? What do we need to do to fix this? I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like in the end, but we got to do the first step first.
Yeah, well, that's a great tie-in to my next question, which is. Not to, sort of end on a down note. I hope not. But I know from a lot of just personal experience that planning in software is useful, but there are some pretty strong limits to how much you can really plan. Any software organization could pretty much just devote itself to just fixing bugs if they wanted to. There's never a shortage of just day-to-day stuff that needs to be done. So I guess my question doesn't just apply to this conference, but in general, what kind of efforts are there to try to ensure that the to-do list or roadmap or whatever generated from this conference, from other things, is followed?
Yeah, that's actually what we're committing to, as far as the Platform Evolution program and the core platform team. And because we think that's been a big, I don't want to say issue, but it's been a sore thumb for previous conferences, is we do come out with a pretty decent amount of ideas, a pretty decent amount of action items, but they're all over the place. It's not really sure who should follow up on them, and even if someone should follow up on them, then who do they talk to? What's the next step? It's never really that clear. And basically, this is kind of how it's been historically. It's there's a lot of great ideas. We get a lot of action as people go and they do things, and all these plans kind of go off on their own and change and evolve. And what we're trying to do with the Platform Evolution program is simply just get all those together in a sensible place and order, right? Hey, we found 12 really important things out of there. We need to do kind of a roadmap and plan out for the next at least 18 months, what we're going to do. How many people do we need to commit to these things, right? What things do we need to follow up? What are most important? Actually, the output of the sessions was what we call structured. So we said, instead of just writing a bunch of notes, which we did publish a bunch of notes, we also wanted to come out with concrete things. So we asked people to answer the specific questions that were posed for each session. We also said, are there any decisions you made? Are there decisions that need to be made? Who's responsible for them? What are the next action items? Who's responsible for them? And so over the next probably couple weeks or so, the core platform team is going through all of the notes from there and trying to pull out those high level things. And so that's kind of how we're following up this time, because we don't want to drop it. And this is also, like I said, the Platform Evolution program is a funded program that's going to be going on for a few years, and this is actually the material that we need to push the program forward, right? We are gathering information to figure out what's most important. We just got a wealth of information from TechConf, so it's ultimately our responsibility to go through and pull all that out and then put together a plan that hopefully everybody will be able to execute, right? It's we're not going to create the plan, unilaterally, but we can pull out all the action items, talk to all the relevant teams, all the relevant parties, whether third party or WMDE, and figure out how do we prioritize this? Which quarter do we do it in? Once we do this, who do we hand it off to? And so we want to go through and find all those things.
Yeah. Cool. That's great. I think that's all the questions I have. Is there anything else you want to say about the conference or anything else really?
No, I guess, the last thing is the conference I think was, it was pretty great as far as, like my viewpoint. Like obviously I was part of like doing it, but I would say that it was great because of all the people that like bought into it. Like I'm not just saying this, but we did a rather different conference, which was like, basically no computers, a lot of Post-it notes, a lot of writing things down, a lot of conversation. After 4 days, if you talk to everybody was pretty exhausted. But we had a lot of people doing a lot of thinking, a lot of talking, like especially like all, from product managers, like to engineers, to third parties, like working together and actually doing this. And everybody put in a lot of effort. Like all the session leaders like took the time, really worked to get things. We had, people writing all these notes, like all these scribes, like facilitators, like trying to move it along. And everybody put like in a full effort. In a situation where maybe sometimes people could be skeptical, like because we're not used to doing that, they actually like put the time in and like made it work. And I think we got a lot of great things out of it because of the effort that people put in.
That's great to hear. Thank you very much, Corey, for coming on the podcast, and it was great talking to you.
Yeah, you too, and thanks again for having me.
This has been another episode of Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guest, Corey Floyd of the Wikimedia Foundation, and thanks for listening, and see you next time.